As the owner of Downtown Cafe, I had seen my fair share of diverse clientele, from regular 9-to-5 office goers seeking their midday caffeine fix, to old friends catching up over a lunch special. Over the years, I developed a certain fondness for my regulars. This cafe wasn't just about business for me. It was a sanctuary. People came here with their secrets, their hopes, their griefs, and I made it my unspoken oath to respect and guard that privacy. One Tuesday, Lorraine, one of our oldest patrons, popped in for her usual spinach and feta quiche. "You wouldn't believe what I read in the paper yesterday evening, Tom," she whispered conspiratorially, her voice trembling. I frowned. Lorraine was usually upbeat. "What happened?" Lorraine hesitated, looking around nervously, before leaning in closer. "I was reading the evening news, and I found a story. A headline that quoted my exact words from lunch the day before about selling my late husband's collection of vintage cars. Maybe it's just a coincidence," I suggested. She shook her head. "No, it was word for word, even the bit about the blue Chevy he proposed in. No one else knew that, Tom." I was perplexed, but tried to assure her, thinking someone must have overheard her and casually mentioned it to a reporter as local gossip. But that was only the beginning. The next day, Patrick, a businessman who often met potential clients at my cafe, accosted me. "Tom," he said, a vein throbbing in his temple, "did you read the paper last night? My merger plans, the ones I discussed over lunch here, they were in the headlines. Not even my board knew about it." Over the next few weeks, this bizarre phenomenon spiraled. Conversations held in hushed tones over lunch appeared as headlines by evening, each story revealing more personal details. Panic began to grip my regulars, their sanctuary violated. Many stopped coming, while others whispered fearfully, glancing around as if expecting a hidden camera to pop out. It was then I remembered a new face. A man, always in a gray trench coat, always sat at the farthest corner booth. He had become a regular over the past month, but he never spoke much or ordered more than a cup of black coffee, scribbling endlessly in his notepad. My gut churned with suspicion. One day, I took the initiative. Walking over, I made casual conversation, noting that his notepad had various phrases written down. They seemed disjointed, but they were eerily familiar. They were snippets from conversations around the cafe. "You a writer?" I asked, feigning casual curiosity. He looked up, startled. "Oh, just a journalist trying to find stories in everyday chatter." His reply was too smooth, too rehearsed. My paranoia grew, but I kept my tone light. "Interesting how the evening paper seems to be echoing the very same stories you find." The man smirked. "Journalism is about being at the right place at the right time." My blood ran cold. This man was eavesdropping on my patrons and spinning their personal narratives into sensational news. But confronting him without evidence would be unwise. The next day, I installed discreet microphones under his booth. If he could play the eavesdropping game, so could I. Each evening, I'd listen, hoping to catch him in the act. One fateful afternoon, Miss Bennett, a widow in her early 60s, confided to her friend about an affair she had decades ago, resulting in a child she gave up. The weight of her guilt and shame was palpable in her voice. That evening, as I replayed the tapes from the journalist's booth, my fears were confirmed. He was on the phone, gleefully discussing the headline of the month for the evening news. This was my chance. I made copies of the recording and approached my lawyer friend, Rachel. Together, we set a trap. The next day, the man in the gray trench coat walked into an ambush. We confronted him, revealing our evidence. The color drained from his face as he realized the implications. "You think you can invade people's privacy? Exploit their emotions?" I seethed. Rachel intervened. "You can avoid legal action if you write a public apology, detailing your unethical practices, and never set foot in this cafe again." He complied. The following evening, instead of personal secrets, the city read about the eavesdropping journalist from Downtown Cafe. Ever since I could remember, I had an affinity for animals. Growing up in a household where my parents ran a small veterinarian clinic in the heart of Larkspur, our quaint little town, animals were an intrinsic part of my life. My parents named me Callie, short for Calico, like the cat. They'd always said it was destiny that I'd follow in their footsteps. But as much as I loved tending to animals, my real passion lay in rescuing the abandoned and the hurt. Maybe because, as an adopted child, I knew what it felt like to be left behind. The early spring morning started just as any other in Larkspur. A haze hung low over the town square, and the wind carried the intoxicating scent of blooming roses. But an undercurrent of tension permeated the town. Whispered in hushed conversations at the bakery, the post office, and even at my clinic. Over the past month, a dozen pets had gone missing. Cats, dogs, even Mrs. Anderson's parrot. It was unsettling, but I had more pressing concerns. A kitten with a broken leg awaited me at the clinic. On my way, I encountered Derek, Larkspur's reclusive animal control officer. He was always an enigma, living at the edge of town, rarely interacting with anyone unless it pertained to his job. Today, though, he looked particularly out of sorts. His eyes darted around anxiously, and he seemed on edge. Our paths crossed more often than I liked. He'd bring in animals he deemed dangerous to the town's populace, demanding they be put down. We had numerous altercations over the years. "Callie," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "Keep an eye on your rescues. There's something going on." Before I could press further, he vanished down an alleyway. Disconcerted, I hastened to my clinic. Days turned into weeks. More pets disappeared, only to mysteriously reappear days later. But they weren't the same. Their eyes bore a vacant stare, and they behaved oddly protective of Derek, growling or hissing if anyone spoke ill of him or approached his property. My concern grew when I witnessed Mrs. Thompson's usually docile poodle snarl at a child who was innocently retelling a spooky story about Derek. My investigative instincts kicked in. Several evenings, after the clinic was closed, I ventured towards Derek's residence, armed with a flashlight and a surge of determination. The thick woods surrounding his house were eerily silent, save for the soft whistles of the wind rustling the leaves. With every step, a chilling sensation crawled up my spine. Finally, after days of observation, I caught a break. Late one night, under the shroud of darkness, I spotted Derek leading a group of the once missing pets into his house. One by one, they filed in. No leash, no force. Like soldiers obeying a general's command. I waited till they were all inside and cautiously approached his home. The soft glow of candlelight emanated from a window. Peeking through, my heart raced as I witnessed a scene that sent shivers down my spine. Derek, seated in the center of a room surrounded by cages, was whispering something, a sort of chant. The animals, oddly entranced, watched him intently, their eyes glowing unnaturally in the dim light. But it was the wall that horrified me the most. It was plastered with photos of people from the town, myself included. String lines connected various photos, creating a web of connections, and at the center of it all, dominating the display, was a large picture of Derek himself, with his eyes blacked out. Panicking, I stumbled backward, accidentally knocking over a pile of firewood. The noise was loud enough to pierce the eerie trance inside. Derek's head snapped towards the window, his eyes meeting mine for a split second. Those eyes full of rage and something else, something indescribably dark and malevolent, terrified me to my core. I ran, fueled by pure adrenaline, back through the woods, stumbling over roots and rocks, hearing the snarls and growls of animals in pursuit. My heart raced, my mind a blur of fear and confusion. The thought of those eyes, that room, the pictures, it was too much to process. Reaching my clinic, I barricaded myself inside. Minutes felt like hours as I listened to the distant sounds of animals, their growls echoing in the silent night. I tried piecing together the puzzle, connecting dots that didn't quite fit. Was Derek using the animals to spy on us? Was he controlling them? But how? By morning, the noises had faded, but my fear hadn't. I shared everything with the town sheriff, who agreed to investigate Derek's residence. But when we got there, it was empty. No signs of the animals, the photographs, or Derek. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Larkspur slowly returned to normal, with pets reuniting with their families, seemingly back to their old selves. But a cloud of mystery hung over the town. Derek was never seen again, and no one spoke of that harrowing month. However, every once in a while, when I'm alone in my clinic, late at night, I'd hear faint whispers, an almost imperceptible chant that sent chills down my spine. The memories would flood back, and I'd wonder, was Derek truly gone? Or was he, with his army of animals, still watching, waiting, and controlling from the shadows? Samantha had always been a quick thinker, an asset that she believed would serve her well as a teacher. Having just graduated with a degree in elementary education, she was eager to mold young minds and prove her worth at Miller's Elementary. Nestled in a quiet suburb, the school seemed the perfect place to kickstart her career. By her second week, Samantha had already established a routine. Her mornings began with flipping through lesson plans and setting up the day's activities. However, that Tuesday, a pale yellow envelope lay atop her desk, unmarked but sealed. It stood out amidst her colorful teaching aids. With a sense of curiosity, she carefully slid it open. Today, at precisely 10:15 a.m., Lila Jefferson will trip over a loose shoelace and break her arm. Samantha's brow furrowed. Lila was one of her most diligent students, and the precision of the note was disturbing. Thinking it a morbid prank by a colleague, she crumpled it and tossed it into the trash. But as the clock's minute hand inched towards the appointed time, she found her gaze constantly drifting towards Lila. At 10:14 a.m., her heart raced as she noticed Lila's untied shoelace. "Class," she began, trying to divert Lila's path. "Let's gather around the front for story time." But just as Lila rose, she tripped. The sickening crack that followed sent chills down Samantha's spine. She rushed to Lila, who was cradling her arm in agony. The incident haunted Samantha. How could someone have known? The next morning, another envelope was waiting for her. This time, its contents read, "At 2:05 p.m., Oliver White will swallow a marble and choke. Act wisely." Horror washed over her. She couldn't dismiss it this time. All day, she kept an eye on Oliver. During playtime, she noticed him fidgeting with a shiny blue marble. As the clock neared 2:05 p.m., she approached him. "Oliver, can I see that marble?" Oliver hesitated, but handed it over. Samantha's relief was palpable. That was, until Oliver pulled another from his pocket, swiftly popped it into his mouth, and began to choke. Panic ensued, but quick thinking on Samantha's part saved the boy. Her paranoia grew. She reported the notes to the school's administration, but without any tangible leads, they dismissed it as an elaborate prank. Nevertheless, school security was increased. Each day brought a new forewarning. Each incident, narrowly averted, left Samantha on the verge of a breakdown. The constant anticipation of disaster weighed on her heavily. She began questioning her every move, doubting her choices. Late Thursday night, while grading papers in her dimly lit classroom, there was a soft knock on the door. Startled, Samantha approached cautiously. She found a note taped to the outside. "Tomorrow, during the fire drill at 11 o'clock a.m., Emma Grant will get lost. She will be found inside the janitor's closet, unconscious from inhaling cleaning chemicals." Samantha felt a chill. She decided to keep Emma close during the drill. The alarm's piercing wail the next day sent the children into a practice line. Samantha held Emma's hand tightly as they filed out. Once outside, she performed a head count, all present. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. The piercing wail of the alarm was replaced with Emma's piercing scream. Rushing inside, she followed the sound to the janitor's closet. Inside, Emma lay, pale and limp, amidst bottles of bleach and detergent. Samantha's heart raced as she pulled Emma out into the fresh air. Emma's shallow breaths gradually deepened, her color returning. The incident was the final straw. Samantha took a leave of absence, traumatized by the week's events. The police launched an investigation, but without concrete evidence, the case went cold. She moved to a different state, tried to start anew. The horror of that week faded, but its shadow never left her. Years later, Samantha attended a reunion at Miller's Elementary. The cheerful atmosphere was tainted with whispers of that terrible week. Some believed it was a ghost, others a vengeful student. Samantha, however, had tried to put it behind her. Late into the night, as the party wound down, she was approached by Mrs. Thompson, a teacher nearing retirement. In hushed tones, Mrs. Thompson confessed, "Samantha, I know who sent those notes. Samantha felt her heart in her throat. Who? Mrs. Thompson glanced around the dimming room and whispered, Paul, a former student of mine. He was truly exceptional. Gifted, you might say. Tragically, he passed away just before you began teaching here. But how could Paul have sent those notes if he's no longer alive? Samantha questioned, confusion evident in her eyes. Mrs. Thompson took a deep breath, her gaze distant. That's the enigma. Paul had an uncanny ability to predict events, random occurrences. It was as if he had a sixth sense. Before he died, he often talked about a better world, a place he said he could glimpse into, where future events were known. Samantha leaned in, absorbing every word. And these notes? I believe Paul saw these incidents happening in this better world. Maybe, just maybe, he tried to send these warnings from beyond to prevent those occurrences. That sounds unbelievable, Samantha said incredulously. So these incidents, they were just random occurrences. But Paul, he tried to warn me. Mrs. Thompson nodded. Exactly. Perhaps he felt that as a new teacher, you were at the heart of these events. By alerting you, he hoped to change the outcomes. The weight of realization settled on Samantha. So, all this time, he was trying to help. Yes, Mrs. Thompson replied softly. He might not be with us in the way we understand, but his spirit, his essence, was trying to make a difference. The reunion dwindled as night deepened. Samantha left with a heavy heart, touched by the tale of a boy she had never met but who had tried to protect her. As she drove away from Miller's Elementary, she whispered a quiet thank you to the wind, hoping Paul would hear.